Okay, I guess we can begin. So thank you so much to the Somerville Museum for letting me share my love for Italy over the years. This is the third talk I've given. First one was 2006, actually. A special thanks to my wife, Marion, for all of her amazing travel planning skills. Couldn't have done it without her. Today, I want to go to the first one. Today, I'm going to take you to the Maremma region of Italy. This includes the towns of Orvieto, Viterbo, and I'm going to concentrate a little bit on Pitigliano and the two little towns above there, Silvana and Serrano. This entire area is where the Etruscans settled, and they've been there since the 6th century BC. But I wanted to take you first to the little town of Sutri, which is down in the right corner. This is an amphitheater, an Etruscan amphitheater that is completely carved out of the tufa mountainside. Tufa is sort of a very porous, it's a calcium carbonate stone that's very easier to carve. So this is the town of Sutri. And we first went there many years ago, I think in the 90s, and it was pouring rain, and we saw this from a distance and had to double back the next day to see it. But it's quite a stunning area. And adjoining that amphitheater, at noon, this woman came out with a giant skeleton key and opened up this church completely carved out of tufa. And in the back were very worn frescoes, but this was just incredible. I mean, you can see the columns are sort of jagged and completely carved out of tufa. So the Etruscan civilization predates the Roman Empire. And it remained Etruscan until it was conquered by the Roman Republic. And this is Tuscania also. This is, there are many headless sarcophagi all around Tuscania, and they're watching over the city. And it makes it even more powerful that they're headless because they're still watching. And so it's pretty striking and mysterious and a little bit eerie as well. Can you sense the eeriness of that photograph? That's my photograph with my old Minolta slide camera, you know. So, and now I'm taking you to Pitigliano. Pitigliano has a very striking appearance, and you can see from a distance. This is where the tufa ends, and that's where the town begins. So it really, it's one of the first towns that I noticed that it really emerges up right out of the tufa. So in some cases, you can't really distinguish where the tufa ends and where the buildings begin. So it's a very distinctive skyline with a Medici aqueduct. And again, you can see they put in fortifications in the lower left there to hold the structures up and the tufa. But it's a very, very sweet town. It only has two main streets and smaller streets that adjoin them. And also, Tuscania is often called Little Jerusalem because the Orsini family in the 1500s was favorable to the Jews and gave them a safe haven in Pitigliano. So there's actually a little synagogue there as well. And that harboring of the Jews continued through World War II. And I just read that there are very few Jews left in Pitigliano now, but because of things changing. And this is one of the lions. I'm sure he's carved out of tufa as well. It's a very handy material, easy to carve. And these are the little streets in Pitigliano. Excuse me? There's no cars in Pitigliano. Nope. Maybe I didn't even see a motorcycle. You have to park, in a lot of these little towns, you have to park outside the gates and then walk in. It's much more pleasant that way. It's a lot of it is tufa. And then this is one of the most amazing little streets. And these little areas here, those are storage areas, and also some of them are garages, and those are carved out of the tufa. So this whole area is really filled with caves, and they're everywhere. And this is all leading up to more talk about caves in the area. And what I recommend is if you go to Pitigliano, before you hike any caves, have a really wonderful meal. Potato ravioli with ricotta and white truffle. I mean, need I say more? And if you notice, right in the middle is a tiny little amethyst flower that they put on top of it. So there are a couple of, even though it's a small town, there are still a couple of really good restaurants and not very expensive. So this is leaving Pitigliano, and you can see all of the caves in the mountainsides. But the Maremma region in general, because of its beautiful combination of sea, hills, and mountain, they all sort of blend together, making a beautiful setting of natural wonders. If you were ever going to rent a car in Italy to drive through this area and visit all of those towns, you would see the real striking landscape of it. Sort of borders on Tuscany and a little bit of Lazio. And now I'm bringing you to the town of Sovana and Serrano. So these are the Via Cava. These were carved into the Tufa mountainside by the Etruscans, and they don't really know the exact reason why they carved them. Some people think it was for protection, some people think it was for getting from one town to another, but along these paths, which are entirely striking, this is all tufa and moss-covered tufa. And if you notice on the bottom there, you cannot walk straight through there. You have to walk sideways because of the ridge that's created at the base of it. But these are otherworldly passages that can go from one town to another even, often with caves in them and burial sites. And you can see the scrapings of the tufa on the sides. So they think that some of these passages were used also for collecting water. And again, they really don't know. But what I would recommend is if you can see how incredible that is right there. Every turn that you took on these paths was just totally striking. You just felt like it was another world. You can see the ridges in the path, and you can see these other canals on the side. When it rains, it pours down there, so it could have been used for collecting water, but it's all speculation. They have not been able to figure out how they were carved out. There's a story that maybe carriages were driven over the mountains, and that it dug a ridge, and they started to widen that over thousands of years, and it became the passage. Here's another one where you can see on the right there that water would flow down there. But I've never seen more moss in my life, and it's just strikingly beautiful. You have to also, if you were vigorous enough and energetic enough to try these paths, you have to make sure that you're going to be able to get back to your car at night, because I would not want to be halfway to Viterbo, and flashlight is necessary at night. But anyway, so here's one of the caves along the path, and as you'll see in an upcoming slide, the insides of some of these tombs. And you can just walk through these. The other thing is that nobody's there. I mean, this is getting a little bit of press in Italy now for tourists, but I think we stumbled on one or two people in the 5 different paths that we took, and they were Italians. So, and I hope that this never gets on Rick Steves, because there'll be a restaurant and a coffee shop, you know, and it just doesn't really work. But no, you have to figure out parking and how you're going to do this. But anyway, this is the inside of one of the caves, and I actually sat on that. You can just go in. No one's there. You're basically on your own, but they're kind of protected. They actually don't want you to film there, so I guess you have to have special permission to do that. And now we're moving from pre-Roman to the 20th century. I'm going to take you to the little town in the middle there called Salò, which is on Lago di Garda or Lake Garda. And this is where the villa of Gabrieli De Nunzio is. This is his villa. Gabrieli De Nunzio was a war hero, a dramatist, novelist, poet, political leader, and a collector with over 30,000 objects. We took a tour of his house there, and there he is. There's one story that, see, Mussolini was very worried about De Nunzio because De Nunzio is very popular in Italy, and Mussolini was worried that De Nunzio could beat him in an election. So Mussolini ended up giving funds to the Vittoriale to keep De Nunzio occupied, and so that he would stay out of office, basically. And so Mussolini allotted funds for the expansion of the estate. And also, De Nunzio had a telephone booth, sort of, in his mansion that was only used to talk to Mussolini. And here are a couple of other photos of the grounds facing Lake Garda. It's quite a stunning sight. Got me. I don't know the answer to that. Probably some state-organized group of some sort. His mausoleum is on the grounds as well. Now, what also Mussolini, as a gesture to De Nunzio, he rewarded De Nunzio for his wartime valor the bow of the ship that's a protected cruiser called the Puglia. And De Nunzio had it embedded into the hillside. And this is an early photo that I found on the internet of them actually installing it into the hillside off Lake Garda. I've never seen anything like this. So, pretty striking. I don't know that there's another one of these anywhere in the world, really. I mean, who has a ship embedded in the hillside of their estate? Just want to give you a sense. There's also, you can go below deck, and they had a little exhibit of some wartime models and things like that below deck. Oh, the hill is the mausoleum on the upper right. But the house was completely full of objects Couldn't believe it. Yeah, we took a tour of the house. No photos allowed in the house, but I do have one coming up that I got from a book that I just wanted to show you. Just one of the rooms, how jammed it was with objects. No, it isn't. The cruisers during the war were named after the regions of Italy, and Puglia is just the heel of the boot. It just ended up being. So also in his collection, he has his aircraft that he flew over Vienna in World War I and dropped pamphlets. And, he survived that, so he brought the plane back, and that's hanging in the house. And believe me, this is just one room, 30,000 objects. I mean, I'm a collector, but I can count mine. This looks like a lot of Islamic, right? Islamic tiles, and he just loved everything. There was even, he sort of encouraged a race car driver to race in this one competition, and the guy perished. He won, but he perished. And De Nunzio has his bent steering wheel in his collection. Lo and behold, that might be, but I don't. I don't think he bathed in that room, though. But Marion?
No, I'm just.
Oh.
They were talking about it. So.
Oh, okay. So De Nunzio really liked Napoleone Martinuzzi, and I don't know how many people here are fans of Italian glass, but I am. The Italian glass from the turn of the century, really, through the 50s, is, I faint over it. It's really, really beautiful. Martinuzzi was incredible. So he was really fabulous at doing animals in glass, and De Nunzio had this animal, the elephant, in his collection, and also the cornucopia chandelier, which is just an amazing Italian design form. So I wanted to mention that, before we go ahead, please, I wanted to mention that Martinuzzi became the artistic director at Vanini for a period of years. And that's all I wanted to say about that. Thank you. So anyway, this is part of my holy card collection. I have more than 300. They're very easy to collect. You know, when I was a child, I had stamp collections, I had coin collections, I had a big orange crate label collection, and this one is the easiest one to collect because you leave a couple of euros at the church and you just take one of each holy card. And I wanted to point out especially, I'm a printing student really, originally, and some of the initial holy cards that I came across had the really large dot structure from early stone lithography. So that sort of appealed to me. And then I just collected the really odd ones, to me anyway. And I'm not a religious person, but this just stirs my imagination, and I use them for collage and things like that. But in the upper left there, you see Saint Oronzo. When I did my genealogy, I stumbled upon somebody named Oronzo with my last name. And Marion said, it's got to be a saint. And it was. And actually, Oronzo Superti had twins, and I found both of their birth certificates. This would have been in the, I would say, turn of the century, early 1900s maybe, something like that. Could have been earlier, might be earlier. And then you have St. Lucy with her eyes on the platter there. And we were in the flea markets in Palermo and Catania a couple of years ago, and the antique dealers in each of those flea markets had volumes about 2 inches thick of just holy cards that were from grandma's collections. And some of them were 10 euros a piece. And they were rare. I mean, I have no idea. But I started to think that after I did my book on the iron horse hitches, that maybe I would do a book on the history of the Holy Card. That would get really involved. I would have to visit a lot of grandmas, a lot of churches, and but now that I didn't buy that many from these antique dealers, I'm sorry that I didn't give them 30 euros to just photograph all of the ones in the book, and then he can keep the book and I'd have the images of them. Jacinta is one of the, what was she?
We'll have to look her up.
She was one of the ones that the Madonna appeared to. Lady of Fatima. Fatima, right? She was one of the Fatima girls. She's a tough little one with her hand on her hip there and everything. I'm in charge here, you know? Well, you know, they used a lot of odd inks back then, too. Both of these are earlier. Yeah, they're not new. And those were from the flea markets in Palermo and Catania. So I had to go through all of these and choose the ones that I wanted. Also, we were in one of the churches in Rome, and they had a whole, under the showcase for the first time, I saw holy cards, and they were €1 a piece, €2 a piece. There were these two little tiny nuns in there that were running it. And I went over to the showcase and I said, I'd like to buy some holy cards. And she said, per la collezione, for your collection. And I thought, there must be incredible collections of these going back to pre-1900 that they just have amassed over a period of time. But there's a beauty of them. And now what they're doing in some of the church stores, they're photographing the old ones and reprinting them. So they do have the large dot structure from stone lithography, but they're new. But one of the churches in Florence has an array of 200 or 300 that you can buy, and I think that they're 3 or 4 for €1. So you have to stand there and go through them all and figure out which ones you want to buy. So this is another holy card that I have of Saint Sebastian, and I don't know if you know of him, but he's always depicted with arrows in him. And there are a lot of stories about why that is, and I don't know whether they're made up or what, but in this particular one on the right, he's got an arrow through his neck, which I don't see necessary. But in the Church of Santa Maria Novella in Florence, this reliquary was in the museum there. And it's a reliquary of St. Sebastian's arm bone with the arrow going through it, all in gold, done in 1616. And I showed this to some Italian friends, and they said that they had never seen that one before. It's by the train station. No, it's one of the churches in Florence. So another saint that became very interesting to me is it's really Giuseppe Moscati, but it's Joseph. And Giuseppe Moscati was a really interesting person. He was a doctor, a scientific researcher, and a professor noted for both his pioneering work in biochemistry and for his piety. And he was canonized in 1987. So even though he was not a priest, he professed a vow of celibacy his entire life. And there are some amazing stories about him. He became the head physician at it's called the Ospedale degli Incurabili, which means the hospital of the incurables. He performed, many miracles, and they in fact say that even in his death, he still holds office hours. But he was also, in 1906, Vesuvius erupted. And he was in charge of a hospital that was right near the eruption. And he was able to get all of the patients out just before the ash caved in the roof. It's another miracle. So he's really, he's very revered in Napoli especially. And there's an altar in the Church of St. Gesù Nuovo in Napoli. And these are just some of the ex votos which you saw on the wall here. This is only one wall of 3 walls of them in the chapel solely devoted to Giuseppe Moscati. And these are not only the ex votos, these are notes and with people's names and everything. It's really, it's quite striking that they say that he was able to just meet with somebody and he would tell you what illness you had. And in that same altar, a bomb landed in the church and didn't explode. What's up with that? So Giuseppe, once again, Giuseppe. And that bomb is right there with the ex votos. And now that we're on the subject of the ex votos, so the ex votos, they're votive offerings given in the expectation of healing or grace received. And it's a prayer transferred into an image. And although they appear, like a fairly simplistic act, for the same reason, it's among the most genuine and sincere offerings. And it's a passage really that establishes a relationship between mankind and divinity. So people see a lot of power in them. And I wanted to just show you 2 of my real favorites. The one on the left, clearly some person had a head injury. This one was very Picasso to me. I saw it pictured somewhere, and I really wanted a copy of it. And we found a silver shop in Naples, and he has all of the early molds. And so this one is pressed silver. He put it on a scale. It weighed like a potato chip, and it was 20 euros, which I thought was fabulous. The donkey was in this little metal shop in Naples, and this was clearly a family that relied on the donkey for work, and the donkey was sick. So an ex voto prayed through it, and hopefully he got well. And in Sicily, this was really surprising to me. My mother, when we grew up in Brooklyn, there was the Church of St. Rita, and they did have wax ex votos on the altar. And in Sicily, it's called a cerreria. It's a wax company. They make these gigantic 6-foot candles that have amazing twists in them for celebrations. But we walked in the shop, and this guy was on the phone in the back, and I said, "Can I take photos?" And he just, knock yourself out, go right ahead. So I photographed these, and I hadn't seen this really ever before, but you can see, I think it's lungs in the back, and leg and 2 heads. So this is in the same way, it's prayed through in hopes of a healing. And so now that we're in the collections part of the talk, one of my favorite artists of Italy is Piero Fornasetti. And over the years, each time we went to Florence, I bought one tie because they were $100 a piece. But these are early Fornasetti ties that you can't really get anymore. And the second one from the left is he used the face of her name is Lena Cavalieri. She was an opera singer who lived at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, who was renowned at the time to be the most beautiful woman in the world. And Fornasetti used her image. You can see some of the faces behind him on the right. And if any of you are interested in collage or interested in Fornasetti, look him up because he created 13,000 objects, one of the most prolific designers of the 20th century. And I have a 2-inch thick book on him that covers his entire genre of work. And he's just, he will, if you want to do collage at all, he will inspire you to no end.
What is the
On the extreme, on the extreme left, it's an architecture to find the straight line. What is that called? A plumb. Yeah, Fornasetti was just extremely clever and versatile in the way that he looked at things. This is nothing compared to what he produced. In fact, there's another artist named Joe Ponte, who's very famous in Italy for his architecture. He designed the Pirelli building and a lot of furniture and ceramics for Ginori porcelain. Fornasetti and Joe Ponte worked together to produce some furniture. So Joe Ponte would design the furniture and Fornasetti would do the collage work on the furniture. And those pieces, when they come up to auction, they're 200,000 because it's a combination of two of the great artists of Italy. And now I'd just like to talk a little bit about, I've always been intrigued by grotesques and gargoyles on buildings. And this is really my favorite one from Scicli, Sicily, on the Palazzo Beneventano. The grotesques are really popular in Sicily, and actually in Ragusa, Sicily, they're underneath porticos, and there are 4 of them in a row, and each one has a horrible or funny or grotesque face looking at you, making faces at the passersby, and there are many, many of them, especially Ragusa. But this one is just really epitomizes the word grotesque to me. And I'm sure that some of you glanced at I call them charts, but there's one page here that's all Paracari. And this is one of the earliest ones that I could find. I mean, I haven't done carbon dating on them, but this one's in Florence, and he is just great. And Paracari means to stop the carriages. So it was to prevent carriages originally from hitting the sides of the building on the way through the driveway. And I became intrigued with them because they had faces and animals, and over the years, I just ended up with 40 different versions of them, and I chose a number of them to make the chart. But I wanted to show you this one in particular and talk about it because it's just, and there's only one of these. Also, you never know when one of these is just going to disappear, and the only record of it is a photograph of it from a time past. Usually in pairs, but I have seen, yeah, and sometimes one is missing or... And then after I did my book, this is my book, by the way, of the Ferri per Cavalli. So these are horse hitches, iron horse hitches from Florence. I have some copies here if anybody's interested in taking a look at it. And I became also interested in battiporta, which just means door knocker. And I began photographing them all over Italy, wherever I could find them. And these are some of my favorite ones. I especially really like the one in Venice in the upper right. The frog with the serpents, and then the serpents eating the grapes. And we only spent a few days in Venice the last time we went, so I think Venice has a rich amount of these all over town, but that was one in particular that I really liked. And the one in Udine seemed to be very old, very early. But I have more than 60 photographs of battiporta. And so it gives me something to do. Marion has to wait for me while I photograph them, so there's no tripod involved here. And so this is my book. That's the first version on the left that I actually designed the entire volume. And then when I got a publisher in 2012, and it's a beautiful story, which I'll keep short. We met a man named Rudolfo Malcori in Florence. He saw my book in a shop in Florence, so he bought it. And he had written 3 books. He was 80 years old. He had written 3 or 4 little books, vignettes of aspects of Florence that he really loved. So he bought my book, and then I bought his book. And he introduced us to the publisher. And so we had this meeting at the publisher where Rodolfo is in this little jacket and a tie, and he's all really cute and everything. And here's Marion and I don't really speak fluent Italian. Rodolfo and Marion are talking to the publisher. And I'm just sitting there kind of like, I only did the book, don't mind me. But that publisher took us and published it. And so it's still for sale in Florence in a few shops. It's very exciting to see that. Occasionally it's in a used bookstore. So, it gets around. And I've seen them online, somebody offering my book in Japan. So I don't know how these things travel, but Poli Stampa, who published the book, they're very good at getting it around. So I was pleased about that. And this is a page from my book. These are some of the earliest, what I believe to be the earliest ferri. So ferri per cavalli just means irons for the horses. These are in the cortile, the inner cortile of the Palazzo del Podestà. And that was a prison originally in the 12th and 13th and 14th century. And so you could really literally ride your horse in if you were a public official of some renown. You could ride your horse in and get sort of private parking and tie your horse to one of the 32 ferry inside the cortile. But it was also a prison, so it's suspected that prisoners were chained to these and sometimes tortured and maybe even executed. But these have been exposed to the air for 750 years. And I particularly like the way that the expressions change once they become corroded, and they just look like they've been through a lot. But every time I go back to the Bargello, I rephotograph them all again, and the guards don't mind, so. Excuse me? The Palazzo Podestà? It's Florence. Yeah, my entire book is just the ferry from Florence. However, I of course collect them wherever I go. But they're mostly in Tuscany. There are none in Milan, there are none in Rome, there are none in Napoli, there are none in Sicily. It's particularly Florence. And I think sort of a medieval kind of approach to that. I just got an email recently from a man in Seattle who is putting together some buildings. He's an architect, and he wanted to recreate some of these for his buildings. So he wanted a copy of my book. So that sort of happens once a year, twice a year. Somebody contacts me from the blue, out of the blue. England, I've had a couple of requests from England. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. This is my new strain of Italian condiments. And I just learned a new word, snocciolate. Snocciolate means pitted. Yeah, and so we're actually visiting this company within the next month. We're going to Cremona. And there's more people with my last name in Cremona than anywhere else in Italy. And you see the one on top, mangiafuoco, you know what that means, eat fire. So it's a hot sauce. My entire family want a whole series of them. I hope they do shipping. But we plan on visiting them. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you so much. So are there any other questions? Does anybody have anything that they want to ask? Yes.
I think there's a ruins that were recently discovered outside of Rome, about an hour outside of Rome, something like a Ponte. I can't think of the name of those. Do you know
Some
ruins that were
ruins?
discovered?
Well, the one thing that's happening in Rome now is, yeah, they're building new train stations, and they're discovering all the time in Rome. They're finding, but they're building these new train stations, and what happens is they find artifacts below where they dig, and they're turning the train station into a museum. So while you're waiting for the train, it's a museum of what they found below. But it's happening, all the time. Really? I don't know. Yes.
They're amazing.
Yeah.
Never heard anything like that before. Would you consider doing a book on them, or are there just not that many?
I don't think that there's that many more than that. But it is interesting. When I first discovered them, I just saw what an odd thing that was. And I had to actually, a friend of ours in Venice, he was an architect, and he was the one who told me what they were called. So nobody really even knew what they were called. But the thing with a lot of these is that people don't notice them. And I was photographing one of the Parakari outside of a building, and a woman was walking in, and I said, "Excuse me, I'm just photographing the Parakaro." And she said, "I've been living here for 6 years. I never noticed it." So that's happened with the ferry as well. I was photographing a pharaoh in front of a woman's clothing shop, and the man came out and said, what are you photographing? And I said, "Your pharaoh." And he said, "I've had this for 11 years. I didn't even notice it was there." And he had a great one. There was only one, but it's very Picasso to me. So, they're about, the ring varies in diameter, and then there's a post coming up from there, and they're probably usually, 8, 10 inches tall. And then the sculptural animal head is at the top. But all of those animal heads, I never found an iron worker who'd actually made one or knew anybody who made one. However, those are done, it's similar to glass blowing, where you heat it up and then you play with it and then you heat it up again. So all of these, I assume, there weren't drawings of them. These were iron workers who would heat it up, poke some eyes, heat it up, cut the mouth, make some teeth, pull some ears. And the ones in Siena were actually the most intricate and involved. In Siena. Yeah. The Sienese were really fabulous iron workers. And I'm sure some ferry that are in other towns were created in Siena because they were so good at it. But some of these with the really wild, they really created amazing things in iron. Which one? Oh, those are grills. Those are ventilation grills in Florence. You see, I ran out of things to photograph. And so, no, but they're really interesting, and nobody else has photographed these. And I think that it's a nice study in design. And I have to get down on the street because a lot of them are right at the road level. I have to get down on my knees to get a good shot, and some of them are up high as well. So, but I just, I have hundreds and hundreds of photos of all of this, and this is just the best of the best that I could decide. And those grills don't exist in other, here and there maybe one. In Florence, they're everywhere. So Florence really was, they like everything to be decorated in that way. It can't just be a normal grid work grill. Yes?
Talk about these very strange things on the wall there.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Mary. I scanned all of the holy cards, and I started to just play with them. And I made these gigantic discs, and actually the one in the lower left there, I made a world out of them. And then the larger print there is 4 of those worlds spun together in Photoshop. And then the House of Cards, that just kind of came to me. I created that completely in Photoshop. I did not make that House of Cards. I used a configuration that I found, but in Photoshop, there are some tools that you can twist and bend and skew. And so I got pretty good at it after a while.
In the early slides that you were showing of the little town, what was the name of the material of the walls?
The tufa.
Was tufa originate from lava?
You know, there's one word called tuff, T-U-F-F. That's a volcanic stone. Tufa is created from moisture of water. That's what I could read, because I didn't know that myself. I thought tufa and toof were the same interchangeable words, but they're not.
It kind of looks like, I was in Pompeii, just like remains, it looked kind of like that.
Could very well be, yeah. And actually I have some, because the walls of the Via Cava are so fascinating that I took some close-ups of the tufa wall. And it's really heavily pockmarked. And I actually brought a sample back with me, but it really has an odor of dankness, and even after a year later I opened it up and it still kind of smelled. And so it was just a weird, because I have a rock collection, you know, I collect. And, but this one I just decided, you know what, maybe not. I'll go to extremes. I'm perfectly capable of that. No, I don't do beer cans. Okay. Well, I was an antique dealer. I knew some beer can collectors. So if anybody wants to see this or wants to own a copy, I have a few with me, but I'd be happy to, you know, let anybody who wants to look at it or pass it down or whatever, so you can enjoy your eyes. Yes?
Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering, one element you presented about with the form study work. How is it that it became associated with the tiles?
How did what?
The form study slide that you showed and spoke about. How did his work become associated with the garments of the tiles?
He did collage on everything.
So he literally produced a tie.
He produced those ties there. He produced.
This is contemporary. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's contemporary. Well, it's those are early, so those are like rare now. Couldn't believe it, but they're rare. But there are Fornasetti stores in Italy now that his children, his son Barnaba, now runs that company, and they are designing new things in his vein. But the early stuff that Piero did is he did placemats, he did clothing, he did scarves. If you look him up, it's a whole world of work in every single media. Very, very inventive. Do you do collage?
I know.
Okay. Because it'll inspire, if you're doing collage and you need ideas, Fornasetti books. And there are numerous books on him. Okay, thank you so much. It's there. They know. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. I like the smaller, intimate group. How did I do?
Very well.
Thank you. Thanks.